Wallet's gone, the man stammered, panic blooming on his face. Brenda, that human glacier of a manager, was already zeroing in. Protocol, call security. Reality, crush a soul over a $5 stew. Clara Ara hesitated. Corporate rules versus the raw terror in his eyes. Not a hard choice. Don't worry, she whispered, reaching for her tip money. What Brenda and the whole damn corporation didn't know. That homeless guy? He wasn't just some down-on-his-luck wanderer. He was holding a kingdom in his hands, and her quiet act of rebellion was about to trigger a corporate earthquake. They had no idea how her quiet kindness would change everything, especially not Brenda. Wallet's gone, the man stammered, panic blooming on his face. Brenda, that human glacier of a manager, was already zeroing in. Protocol, call security. Reality, crush a soul over a $5 stew. Clara Ara hesitated. Corporate rules versus the raw terror in his eyes. Not a hard choice. Don't worry, she whispered, reaching for her tip money. What Brenda and the whole damn corporation didn't know. That homeless guy. He wasn't just some down-on-his-luck wanderer. He was holding a kingdom in his hands, and her quiet act of rebellion was about to trigger a corporate earthquake. They had no idea how her quiet kindness would change everything, especially not Brenda. The alarm, a digital banshee at 5 a.m., tore Clara from a fitful sleep. Each shrill beep was a fresh paper cut on her frayed nerves. Her back throbbed, a souvenir from the endless hours spent hustling at the Golden Spoon Diner. The air hung thick with the ghosts of yesterday's coffee and a hint of Leo's lavender laundry soap, a small, fragile sweetness in their cramped apartment. She forced herself upright, the linoleum cold beneath her bare feet. A dry, rattling cough echoed from Leo's room, a sound that always twisted her insides into knots. His asthma, a relentless enemy, was a constant drain on their resources, a lurking monster fueled by Chicago's grimy air and bad luck. The new nebulizer sat on the bedside table, a stark plastic reminder of their last frantic ER visit in the mountain of debt it had spawned. Clara stared at it. Each treatment, each prescription, was a tightrope walk over financial ruin. At 29, Clara felt ancient. The mirror reflected a stranger, tired eyes framed by the faintest etchings of worry. Her once bright blonde hair was now a practical, unflattering ponytail, a silent testament to her relentless schedule. The Golden Spoon Diner, a cog in the Kensington Erie's Incur machine, wasn't glamorous. It was survival. It paid the rent, barely, and kept Leo's inhalers filled mostly. The uniform, a drab polyester yellow dress, clung to the scent of fryer oil, a badge of honor and exhaustion. As she buttoned it up, she mentally braced herself for the day. Drop Leo at Mrs. Gable's, dodge the morning traffic. Remember the clam chowder special? And above all, navigate the minefield that was Brenda Vance. Brenda was the diner's manager, a creature forged from corporate policy, stale coffee, and pure, unadulterated ambition. She ruled with a clipboard and a stopwatch, reducing customers to tickets and employees to units of labor. Efficiency was her religion, and compassion was a heresy. Miller, you're 3 minutes late, Brenda would snap even if Clara clocked in at 6:03 a.m. That's 180 seconds of unproductive labor cost the company has to absorb. Clara choked down a dry piece of toast, kissed Leo's forehead, whispering promises of a better day. She left a note and a small glass of juice on the counter and slipped into the pre-dawn chill. The Golden Spoon was already buzzing with nervous energy when she arrived. Cooks wrestled with bacon, dishwashers clattered stacks of plates, and the other waitresses moved with a practiced, joyless urgency. Morning, Clara, Maria sighed, pouring coffee. Brenda's on a warpath. Renshaw's coming. Clara stomach clenched. Mark Renshaw, the regional manager, was a corporate predator known for his surprise inspections and his ruthless efficiency. His visits meant Brenda would be a pressure cooker, scrutinizing every coffee pour and every stray crumb. Great, Clara muttered, tying her apron. Just what we need. The morning rush was a chaotic ballet of orders, deliveries, and spilled coffee. Clara moved with practiced grace, a forced smile masking her fatigue. She endured the grumpy old man's coffee complaints, patiently navigated the tourist's indecision, and even managed a genuine laugh for Mr. Henderson's tired jokes. All the while, she felt Brenda's hawkish gaze tracking her every move. A tap on Brenda's watch as Clara Ara helped Mr. Henderson find his glasses. A subtle frown at the spilled water. By midday, the frenzy subsided. Clara Ara leaned against the counter, rubbing her aching feet. Her tips were meager. After Mrs. Gable and groceries, barely enough for Leo's copay. The anxiety, a constant companion, gnawed at her. At precisely 1:15 p.m., the bell above the door chimed, announcing a man who seemed almost invisible. Ragged clothes, matted gray hair, a face etched with the hardships of a life lived on the fringes. He hesitated at the threshold, his eyes scanning the room with a mixture of hunger and shame. Brenda, near the register, fixed him with a hostile glare, ready to eject him. But Clara Ara, whose station included the empty tables near the door, saw him first. Their eyes met, and in his, she saw not a nuisance, but a profound, desperate exhaustion. Acting on instinct, she grabbed a menu, stepped in front of Brenda, and offered a gentle smile. "Table 41?" she asked, her voice soft. The man looked surprised, then nodded slowly. Brenda froze, her face a mask of incandescent fury. The battle lines had just been drawn, and Clara Ara had no idea she was fighting for a man who held the fate of empires in his hands. He slid into the cracked vinyl booth, his movements stiff and awkward. He hunched over the menu, not reading it, but lost in some distant thought. Clara Ara could feel Brenda's stare burning into her back, a direct act of defiance. "Can I get you something to drink?" Clara Ara asked, approaching the table. "Coffee's fresh." He looked up, his eyes a surprisingly clear blue, though clouded with weariness. Just water, please." "Thank you." His voice was raspy, unused. When she returned with the water, he hadn't opened the menu. He was staring out the window, a solitary figure in the bustling diner. "Have you decided what you'd like?" Clara asked gently. He flinched, startled. "Oh, He looked down at the menu, then back at her, a flush rising on his weathered cheeks. "What's the cheapest thing you've got that's filling?" he mumbled, his eyes fixed on the table. Clara Ara's heart ached. She'd heard that question before, in countless variations. "The sunrise special is our best value," she said, pointing to the breakfast section. 2 eggs, bacon, toast, and hash browns. It's $10. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "But the kitchen made beef stew for lunch. It's not on the menu, but it's hearty. I can get you a big bowl of that for $5. Comes with bread." His head shot up, his blue eyes wide with surprise and gratitude. "The stew," he said, his voice cracking. "Yes, please. Thank you." As Clara Ara walked to the kitchen, a renewed sense of purpose washed over her. It was about feeding someone, offering comfort, a basic human connection. The man, Art, he'd mumbled his name was, ate with a quiet, deliberate hunger. He didn't gorge himself. He ate with a dignity that belied his appearance. He cleaned the bowl with the bread, his movements methodical. Clara Ara kept his water glass full, checking on him as she would any other customer, despite Brenda's increasingly hostile glares. Art didn't complain, didn't ask for anything, but he watched. Clara Ara didn't know it, but he was watching everything. He saw her patiently explain the menu to the elderly couple, slip crayons to the restless toddler, expertly balance 6 plates on her arm. He saw her coworker Maria drop a tray of glasses, and Clara Ara's immediate offer of help, not recrimination. Most of all, he noticed the interactions with Brenda, the hushed, angry reprimands for spending too long at his table. "Your job is to maximize turnover, Miller, not run a charity. That booth has been occupied for 45 minutes for a $5 sale. Unacceptable." Clara Ara simply nodded, her face impassive. When Art finished, he sat for a long time, just nursing his water. Finally, he signaled for the check. Clara Ara brought it over with a small smile. "No rush at all," she said. He nodded and reached into his pockets. He patted his front pockets, then his back pockets. Confusion flickered across his face, quickly escalating into panic. He searched more frantically, his breathing becoming shallow. "Is everything all right?" Clara Ara asked, her smile fading. My wallet, he stammered, his eyes wide with fear. It's gone. Must have been stolen on the bus. I I don't have any money. I can't pay. He looked utterly mortified, his face pale. He started to rise as if to flee. I'm so sorry, This was the moment of truth. Company policy, drilled into them by Brenda, was crystal clear. If a customer cannot pay, signal the manager immediately. It was a zero-tolerance policy to prevent theft and protect company assets. Clara looked at the terrified man. Then she glanced at Brenda, who was watching, eyes narrowed. She knew what she should do. Raise her hand, call Brenda over, and let the corporate machine grind this man to dust over a $5 bowl of stew. She thought of Leo, the overdue bills, her precarious finances. Losing this job would be catastrophic. Then she looked back at Art, at the crushing humiliation in his eyes. Her own struggles didn't make her harder. They made her softer. She understood desperation. She understood being one unlucky breakaway from disaster, making a split-second decision that would alter her life. She gave him a reassuring look and placed a hand gently on his arm. Don't worry about it, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Stay here. Please, don't move. Before he could protest, she walked away, not towards Brenda, but towards the small pocket in her apron where she kept her tips. Every instinct screamed at her to follow the rules, to protect herself and her son. But the image of the man's panicked face was seared into her mind. She fumbled in her apron, her fingers closing around the crumpled wad of bills. A 10, 3 ones, and some change. $13 in change. Her gas money, grocery money, just in case Leo's inhaler runs out money. It was everything. With trembling hands, she smoothed out a $5 bill and 2 ones. The check was for $500 plus tax, totaling $545. She would use her own money, ring it up as a cash payment, and Brenda would be none the wiser. The man could leave with his dignity, and she could keep her job. It felt like a simple, elegant, and compassionate solution. She walked to the point-of-sale terminal, her back to Brenda. Quickly, she typed in the table number and selected the cash option. Her hands were sweating as she opened the drawer to deposit the money. What are you doing, Miller? The voice, ice cold, sliced through her. Clara froze, her hand inside the drawer. She slowly turned to face Brenda Vance. The manager's face was a thunderous mask. Her eyes narrowed to slits. I was just cashing out table 7, Clara stammered, trying to sound casual. With what money? Brenda's voice was dangerously low. I've been watching you. That man told you he couldn't pay. I saw it on his face. And you did not signal for a manager as per protocol. Clara's mind raced. He found the money. It was in a different pocket. A weak lie, crumbling under Brenda's glare. Open your hand, Brenda commanded. Clara hesitated. Brenda, it's really Miller, or I'll have security do it for you. Defeated, Clara opened her hand, revealing the crumpled bills. Brenda's eyes flickered from the money in Clara's palm to the cash drawer and back again. A slow, cruel smile of triumph spread across her face. This was the moment she had been waiting for. A clear, undeniable breach of policy. So, this is how it is, Brenda said, her voice rising, attracting attention. You are using your own funds to pay for a customer's meal, an unauthorized transaction, a flagrant violation of Kensington Erie's Policy 7B, subsection 4. Employee funds shall not be commingled with company revenue or used to settle a customer's bill under any circumstances. She recited the rule like scripture. The diner was growing quiet. The clatter of cutlery faded as people turned to watch. At table 7, Art looked on, his face a mixture of horror and disbelief. He started to rise, but Clara subtly shook her head, begging him to stay put. Intervening would only make it worse. He was hungry, Brenda, Clara pleaded, her voice a desperate whisper. He didn't have any money. It was $5. What was I supposed to do? Call the cops on him for a bowl of stew? You were supposed to follow procedure, Brenda snapped. Procedures exist for a reason, to protect this business. What happens next time? Do you give away a steak dinner? Empty the register for every sob story that walks in? You're not just an employee, Miller. You're a liability. Humiliation pressed down on Clara, making it hard to breathe. Her cheeks burned under the pitying stares of her coworkers and the judgmental gazes of the customers. "I paid for it," Clara said, her voice trembling but defiant. "The company didn't lose a cent. In fact, you made a profit on the stew." This was the wrong thing to say. Brenda's face contorted with rage. "This isn't about one bowl of stew. It's about authority, discipline, the precedent you're setting. You have undermined my authority and willfully disregarded corporate policy. You have proven that you cannot be trusted." Brenda stepped back, rigid. No longer a diner manager, but an executioner. "Clara Miller," she announced, her voice ringing with a cold finality that chilled Clara to the bone. "As of this moment, your employment with Kensington Erie's is terminated. You are fired." The word hung in the air, sharp and brutal. A gasp rippled through the diner. Maria had her hands over her mouth, her eyes wide. Even the cook stared from the kitchen. "Brenda, you can't!" Clara choked out, tears welling. "Please, my son. I need this job." "You should have thought of your son before you decided to become a martyr for a vagrant," Brenda retorted coldly. "Take off your apron. Your final paycheck will be mailed. 5 minutes to collect your things. I'll escort you out myself." Numbly, Clara untied the apron. The cheap yellow fabric felt heavy. She folded it and placed it on the counter, the tears streaming down her face. She looked past Brenda to table 7. The man, Art, was standing, his face pale, his fist clenched. He looked like he wanted to scream, to tear the place down. But what could he do? He was a nobody who had cost a kind woman her livelihood. Their eyes met one last time, and in his, she saw profound, agonizing regret. As Brenda marched her toward the lockers, the silence was broken by a chair scraping back in a heavy clatter. Someone had left a $20 bill on table 7, next to the half-empty glass of water. But it was too late. The gears were in motion, and Clara Miller, mother, waitress, good Samaritan, was now unemployed. The walk home was a blur. Clara didn't register the familiar route, the crack in the sidewalk, the elevated train. All she felt was the phantom weight of the apron and the searing humiliation. The city sounds were muffled, as if she were underwater, drowning in despair. Reaching her apartment building, the stairs felt like a mountain. Each step was leaden, her legs trembling. The key fumbled in the lock. Finally, the door clicked open, and she stepped into the silence of her empty apartment. For a moment, she stood in the entryway, her purse sliding from her shoulder with a soft thud. The reality crashed down on her. "Fired!" The word echoed, mocking her. Fired for a $5 bowl of stew, for being kind. She sank onto the worn sofa, the springs groaning. No tears. They had run dry, leaving behind a hollow ache. Her mind was a chaotic storm. Rent, Leo's medication, food. Panic clawed at her throat. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold the pieces of her crumbling world together. She was a good worker. She was never late. She covered shifts for others. She did everything that was asked of her and more. How could it all be undone by one small act of compassion? Her eyes fell on a framed photograph on the end table. It was of her and her late husband David, taken 5 years ago on a rare trip to the lake. They were smiling, their faces bright with a future that had seemed so full of promise. David had been a chef, a man who believed that food was love. She was a good worker. She was never late. She covered shifts for others. She did everything that was asked of her, and more. How could it all be undone by one small act of compassion? Her eyes fell on a framed photograph on the end table. It was of her and her late husband David, taken 5 years ago on a rare trip to the lake. They were smiling, their faces bright with a future that had seemed so full of promise. David had been a chef, a man who believed that food was love. He would have been proud of what she did today. "You always feed a hungry man, Clara," he used to say. "No questions asked. That's the first rule of the kitchen." David had also worked for a Kensington Erie's establishment, a more upscale bistro downtown. He'd been passionate, creative, a rising star in the kitchen. Then one night he'd been fired. The official reason was unauthorized use of company inventory. He had made a beautiful birthday cake for a dishwasher whose family couldn't afford one, using a handful of flour, sugar, and eggs from the pantry. He was fired on the spot by a manager just like Brenda, a man who saw only inventory shrinkage, not a gesture of human decency. The dismissal had broken David's spirit. He struggled to find another job with that mark on his record. The stress, the shame, it led him down a dark path. A year later, he was gone, leaving Clara alone with a 2-year-old Leo in a mountain of grief. The bitter irony was not lost on her. The same corporation with its same soulless, rigid policies had now shattered her life just as it had shattered his. It was a cruel repeating pattern, a legacy of corporate indifference that had claimed her family twice. A wave of anger, hot and fierce, finally broke through the numbness. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about David. It was about every little person ground up by the unfilling machinery of a giant company that valued rules over people. Getting up from the couch, she walked to Leo's room. He was still at Mrs. Gable's. She would have to call and tell her she couldn't afford to pay her for the rest of the week. Her son was sleeping soundly in his small bed, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. The nebulizer stood guard on his nightstand. She reached out and gently brushed a lock of hair from his forehead. He was her whole world. Everything she did for him, and now she had failed him. That was the thought that finally broke her. The tears came again, silent and agonizing. She sank to the floor, her head resting against the side of his bed, and wept. She wept for her lost job, for her shattered pride, for the uncertain future. She wept for David and the life they were supposed to have. She wept for the simple, crushing unfairness of it all. As the evening light faded outside the window, casting long shadows across the room, Clara Miller felt a profound and terrifying loneliness. She had never felt so utterly and completely alone in the dark. While Clara's world was shrinking to the four walls of her silent apartment, another world, one of panoramic city views and polished mahogany, was being shaken to its core. Arthur Kensington, known to Clara only as Art, sat in the back of his chauffeured Maybach, the scent of rich leather, a stark, nauseating contrast to the diner's lingering smell of grease and despair. He had shed the ragged clothes now stuffed in a duffel bag on the floor and was back in a tailored Bion suit. But the transformation was only skin deep. Inside, he was still the man from Table 7, horrified, ashamed, and powerless. He hadn't intervened. That was the thought that played on a torturous loop in his mind. He, Arthur Kensington, CEO and chairman of Kensington Eries, Inc., a man whose single word could create or destroy careers, had sat by and watched a good woman be publicly humiliated and fired for showing him a kindness he hadn't experienced in years. He had stayed in character, played the part of the helpless vagrant because his undercover CEO consultants had told him that intervention would compromise the entire project. Observe and report, Mr. Kensington. Do not engage. What a fool he'd been. This whole exercise, cooked up by his PR team, was supposed to be a way to reconnect with the company his father had built. See the front lines, Art, his father had always said. A company's heart isn't in the boardroom, it's on the diner floor. After his father's death 6 months ago, Arthur, who had been raised on spreadsheets and profit margins, felt a knowing disconnect from that philosophy. He agreed to the undercover stunt, expecting to find inefficiency, maybe some minor theft, things he could fix with a memo and a new set of policies. Instead, he found Clara, and he found Brenda. He had witnessed firsthand the brutal manifestation of the very corporate culture he had fostered. Brenda wasn't a monster. She was a product. She was the perfect manager by his company's standards. She quoted policy, maximized profit, and eliminated inefficiencies. And Clara, with her boundless empathy, was the inefficiency she had eliminated. The car pulled up to the gleaming Kensington Tower, a monument of glass and steel that suddenly felt like a tomb. In his penthouse office on the 80th floor, the city lights spread out below him like a blanket of scattered jewels. He had always found this view inspiring, a symbol of his power and success. Tonight it just made him feel small and isolated. "Get me Mark Renaud on the line now," he barked at his assistant through the intercom, "and pull the complete employee file for a waitress named Clara Miller from the Golden Spoon Diner on North Clark Street. And while you're at it, Get me the file for the manager, Brenda Vance. He paced the length of his office, the plush carpet, muffling his angry footsteps. He had seen the fear in Clara Ara's eyes when she pleaded for her job, mentioning her son. He had created a system where a mother's livelihood could be extinguished over 545 holes. The thought was sickening. His assistant buzzed back. Mr. Renshaw is online, sir, and the files have been sent to your secure tablet. Arthur snatched the phone. Mark, he said, his voice dangerously calm. Arthur Kensington, I was reviewing the performance metrics for the North Clark Street diner. Tell me about the manager, Brenda Vance. Renshaw, clearly caught off guard by a direct call from the CEO, stammered for a moment. Mr. Kensington, sir, Brenda Vance is an exemplary manager, a real bulldog. She has the highest profit margins in my district. Table turn times are down 15%, and upsells are up 20% since she took over. And her staff turnover rate, Arthur asked, his eyes cold. There was a pause. Well, sir, that is slightly higher than average, but in this industry, slightly higher. Arthur cut him off, his voice dripping with sarcasm. I'm looking at the numbers right here, Mark. It's the highest in the entire Midwest region. She churns through employees like they're disposable napkins. Do you reward that? Her results speak for themselves, sir, Renshaw said defensively. She's a bottom-line manager. That's what we've been incentivizing. We've been incentivizing. The words hit Arthur like a punch to the gut. Renshaw was right. The problem wasn't just Brenda or Mark. The problem was him. We're going to talk more about your incentive programs tomorrow, Mark. Be in my office at 8 a.m., Arthur said, and hung up before Renshaw could reply. He picked up his tablet and opened Clara Ara Miller's file. It was sparse. Hired 3 years ago. No commendations, no demerits, just a steady, unremarkable record. He saw her address, her emergency contact information, and a note about her dependent son, Leo. Then he swiped to the next page to her personal information. He saw her last name, Miller, and next to it, the name of her late husband, listed as her former next of kin, David Miller. Arthur's blood ran cold. David Miller. The name echoed from the past. He quickly accessed the company's terminated employee archives, his fingers flying across the screen. He typed in the name. One result, David Miller, former line chef, terminated 5 years ago from the Kensington Grill. Arthur remembered the incident vaguely. A regional manager, a different one, had boasted about it in a quarterly meeting, making an example of a chef who had been caught giving away inventory. They had all nodded along, praising the manager's firm hand in protecting company assets. He looked back at Clarara's file, then at David's. It was the same address. He stared at the screen, the pieces clicking into place with a horrifying, sickening finality. This wasn't a random encounter. This was a ghost of his company's past, a direct consequence of a culture he had helped build and perpetuate, coming back to haunt him. He had not just witnessed an injustice, he had participated in the second act of a tragedy his own company had written. The view from his window suddenly seemed to mock him. He had built an empire on a foundation of cold, hard numbers, and in the process he had crushed the lives of real people. People like David, people like Clara Ara. A profound, soul-deep shame washed over him, followed by a white-hot resolve. This was not something a memo could fix. This required more than a policy change. This required a reckoning. He buzzed his assistant again, his voice now steady, and imbued with a commanding clarity he hadn't felt in years. Cancel my 8 a.m. meeting with Mark Renshaw, he said. Clear my entire morning schedule and have my car ready at 7:30 a.m. I'm going back to the Golden Spoon Diner. The next morning, the Golden Spoon Diner was operating with a nervous, subdued energy. Clara Ara's absence was a palpable void. The staff moved with a hesitant caution, every action performed under the shadow of the previous day's brutal firing. Brenda Vance patrolled the floor like a victorious general, her posture even more rigid than usual, her presence a clear warning to anyone else considering stepping out of line. She was sipping her coffee near the register when the bell above the door jingled. She looked up, a formulaic welcome to the Golden Spoon dying on her lips. Standing in the doorway was not a regular customer. It was a man in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than her car. He was flanked by 2 other people, A man and a woman, both impeccably dressed and holding portfolios. The man in the suit was tall with an air of absolute unshakable authority. His clear blue eyes swept across the diner, taking in every detail. They were the same intelligent blue eyes Brenda had seen in The Ragged Vagrant the day before. Her brain struggled to connect the two images. It was impossible. She blinked, but he was still there now, walking slowly toward her. "Good morning, Aku," the man said, his voice calm but resonant with power. It was the same voice, no longer raspy but smooth and commanding. "I believe we met yesterday. You, however, met Art. My name is Arthur Kensington." Brenda's coffee cup slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor and splashing hot liquid across her sensible shoes. She didn't even notice. The name echoed in her ears. Kensington, as in Kensington Eries. The staff behind the counter froze. The low chatter of the few morning customers died away. Mr. Kensington," she stammered, her face draining of all color. I had no idea, sir. It's an honor. I didn't recognize you." "That was the point," Arthur said coolly, his gaze unwavering. "I came to see my company from the perspective of a customer, or in my case, from the perspective of a man with nothing, and what I saw was illuminating." He gestured to the two people with him. "This is Elizabeth Shaw, my head of human resources, and this is Michael Chen from my legal department. We're here to conduct an immediate and thorough operational review." He then turned his attention to the rest of the stunned staff. "I would like to assure you all that your jobs are safe. We are here to fix what is broken, not to punish those who have been forced to work within a broken system." His gaze landed back on Brenda, and all warmth vanished from his eyes. "I saw a manager who prioritizes policies over people, who values a $5 transaction over human dignity, and who fires a dedicated, compassionate employee without a moment's hesitation to enforce a soulless rule." Brenda was trembling now, her carefully constructed world collapsing around her. "Sir, I was just following procedure. The company handbook. I am well aware of what the handbook says." Arthur interrupted, his voice sharp as glass. "I signed off on it, and I have never been more ashamed of my own signature. You did exactly what the system I created taught you to do, and that is the problem." He turned to his HR head. "Elizabeth, I want you to begin one-on-one interviews with every employee here. I want to know everything unfiltered, unedited. I want to know about their struggles, their fears, their ideas." Then he pulled out his personal phone. He scrolled through a contact and pressed call. He put it on speaker for Brenda to hear. After 2 rings, a weary, grief-stricken voice answered. "Hello, Clara Ara." "Clara Ara Miller?" Arthur asked, his own voice softening considerably. There was a pause. "Yes. Who is this?" "My name is Arthur Kensington." "You? You helped me yesterday at the diner. I was the man at table 7. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy with confusion and disbelief. I don't understand." "I know you don't. And I am so profoundly sorry for what happened to you. More sorry than I can possibly put into words. What you did was the kindest, most decent thing I have seen in a very long time, and you were punished for it. That ends today." He took a deep breath. "Clara Ara, I need to ask you to come back to the diner right now. There's something we need to discuss in person. It's important. It's about your husband, David." At the mention of David's name, there was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Brenda's eyes went wide. She knew about David Miller's firing. It was a legendary story among Kensington managers, an example of how to maintain standards. The full, horrifying scope of the situation was finally dawning on her. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Clara Ara said, her voice no longer weary, but filled with a new, sharp, and uncertain intensity. Arthur ended the call and looked at Brenda, whose face was now a pale, ghostly white. "The woman you fired yesterday," Arthur said, his voice low and heavy with meaning, "was the widow of a man our company already failed once. You didn't just fire a waitress. You repeated history, and I was there to witness the whole shameful cycle. Now we are all going to sit here and wait for her to arrive, and we are going to begin to make it right." Clara R.A. walked into the Golden Spoon Diner like a person entering a dream. The 20-minute taxi ride paid for by the car service Arthur Kensington had sent had done little to prepare her for the scene inside. Her former co-workers were gathered in small, hushed groups. Her former manager, Brenda Vance, was sitting stiffly at a table, pale and silent. And in the center of it all stood the man from table 7, no longer Art the Vagrant, but Arthur Kensington, the CEO, his powerful presence commanding the entire room. He turned as she entered, and the look on his face was one of deep, undisguised remorse. He walked toward her, meeting her in the middle of the diner floor. "Clara Ara," he began, his voice filled with an emotion she couldn't quite place. "Thank you for coming. First, before anything else, I want to apologize. What happened to you yesterday was an unforgivable failure on my part and on the part of the company I lead. There is no excuse." Clara Ara was still trying to process the sheer surreality of it all. You're the CEO," she stated the words, feeling foreign in her mouth. "I am," he confirmed, "and I have been a very poor one. I lost sight of what my father built this company on, people. You reminded me of that. Your compassion, your integrity, even when it cost you everything. That is the core of what this business should be." He gestured to an empty booth. "Please sit with me." Hesitantly, she slid into the booth and he sat opposite her. For the first time, she wasn't his waitress. They were equals. "When I looked at your employee file," he continued gently, "I found something that stopped me in my tracks. Your husband's name, David Miller. I remembered his case. Clara Ara's stiffened old wounds, reopening with a fresh, sharp pain. You fired him for giving a birthday cake to a man who had nothing." Arthur didn't flinch from her accusatory gaze. He met it head-on. "Yes," he said, his voice thick with regret. "We did. It was a decision made by a regional manager, but I was the CEO. I endorsed the culture that allowed it to happen, a culture that prized a few dollars worth of flour and sugar over a man's dignity and career. I see now with a clarity that sickens me that David's firing wasn't just a mistake. It was a moral failing, a failing that I believe contributed to what happened to him, and for that I am truly deeply sorry." Tears welled in Clara Ara's eyes, but this time they were not tears of despair. They were tears of validation of a long-held pain finally being acknowledged. "Clara Ara, I cannot undo the past," Arthur said, leaning forward, his voice earnest. "I cannot bring David back, but I can promise you starting today that his legacy and your act of kindness will become the catalyst for a fundamental change in this entire corporation." He paused, collecting his thoughts. "I didn't come here just to offer you your job back. Frankly, you deserve better than that. I am creating a new position, a new department within Kensington Eries. It's called the Kensington Cares Initiative. Its sole purpose will be to audit and reform our company policies, to implement employee support programs, and to ensure that compassion and empathy are woven into the very fabric of how we do business. We'll establish emergency funds for employees in crisis, overhaul our management training, and create pathways for real feedback from the ground up." He looked at her, his blue eyes filled with a desperate hope. "And I want you to run it. I want you to be its first ever director. I don't want someone with a business degree who's never served a plate of food in their life. I want someone who understands the human cost of a bad policy. I want someone with integrity, with courage, and with a heart. I want you, Clara Ara." Clara Ara was speechless, the director of a corporate initiative. It was unfathomable. "Me? I'm a waitress. I don't know how to run a department. You know how to be a decent human being." Arthur counted. "That's the most important qualification. We will provide you with all the training resources and support you need. A team, an office at headquarters, and a salary that will ensure you and Leo never have to worry about a medical bill or the rent again. I'm not offering you a job, Clara Ara. I'm asking you to be my partner in fixing this company, to help me build a corporation that David would have been proud to work for." Across the room, Brenda Vance watched this exchange, her face a complicated mask of shock, shame, and perhaps for the first time, a glimmer of understanding. Her world of rigid rules and cold metrics had been turned upside down by a single act of kindness she had tried to stamp out. Clara Ara looked at Arthur Kensington, the man she had fed when he was hungry. She thought of Leo, of David, of the endless, exhausting struggle. And for the first time in years, she saw a light at the end of the tunnel. Not just an escape from her circumstances, but a chance to build something better, to give meaning to her own suffering and to David's memory. A slow, tentative smile touched her lips. "Okay," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Yes, I'll do it." Arthur Kensington let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. It was the beginning of a long road, but it was a start. The Golden Spoon Diner, once the scene of a cruel injustice, had just become the birthplace of a revolution, all because one waitress chose kindness over policy, and one CEO was finally willing to see the human beings behind his bottom line. The story of Clara Miller and Arthur Kensington isn't just about a job lost and a fortune gained. It's a powerful reminder that our true character is revealed not in how we follow the rules, but in how we treat each other, especially when no one is watching. Clara Ara's simple act of kindness, born from her own struggles, created a ripple that didn't just come back to her. It grew into a tidal wave of change that reformed an entire company. It proves that one person armed with empathy can be more powerful than the most rigid corporate policy. Her story teaches us that true strength lies in compassion and that sometimes the biggest risks lead to the most profound rewards. What seems like a thankless sacrifice could be the very thing that changes everything. If Clara Ara's incredible journey moved you, please give this video a thumbs up to spread the message of kindness. Don't forget to share it with someone who might need to hear it. And for more real-life stories that will inspire and amaze you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications.